Hey friends!
Welcome to Ye Old Entertainment and welcome to part 2 of the video on games that I have been playing. Last time we talked about Repella Fella, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound and Captain Bones. There's a link in the description section of this video just in case you want to check that one out as well. Those were all in the good tier though. Now we are going to go a little bit further down in our system of categories. So grab your double-barreled shotgun, pour yourself a fresh cup of coffee, and get on that Zeppelin because we are about to take off. So without further ado, here are the games that I have been playing, part 2. Soulslinger, Envoy of Death. Man, talk about a roller coaster of an experience. Soulslinger Envoy of Death went from being squarely at the bottom of this list to surpassing Bloodshed, another FPS developed by Head Up that we're going to be talking about in this video, to being in the top 3 games on this list, to getting its own video, to getting the most cautious Ye Old Gamer recommends seal of approval that I have ever given, to being back on this video. But before we get into why, let's get the basic stuff out of the way. Soulslinger Envoy of Death is a roguelite FPS that takes place in a Western-inspired version of Limbo. Just go with it for now, okay? And that takes its story pretty freaking seriously and expects you to do it too. It also features production values that punch well above the game's indie weight. And this goes for music, graphics, and sound effects. Soulslinger Envoy of Death did a couple of things pretty well in my book, and it did a few other things pretty badly, so let me tell you all about them. The gameplay cycle is that of a roguelite, which means that you start to run and kill things until you kill a boss for the first time, or finish the game, or get killed in the process. And if you get killed, you must start all over again from the very beginning, so standard roguelite stuff. Soulslinger is structured in acts. Each act consists of a series of levels that you must clear and a final big bad boss. Each level takes place in a relatively confined space where enemies will spawn relentlessly until there are no more enemies to kill. When that happens, you get a reward, and depending on the options you chose on the previous level, you may get to choose one of 3 possible perks. Some of these perks are passive bonuses, some of them trigger when you dash, like pools of acid or fire that you leave behind, and some are skills with cooldown times that get mapped to your number keys. Sometimes you also get a new weapon that you can change for one of the 2 weapons that you're carrying with you at the time. And yes, you can only carry 2 weapons at any given time in this game. In Soulslinger Envoy of Death, there are essences. There's the toxic essence, the fire essence, lightning, blood, shadow, etc. At the end of each level, you are asked to choose one of 2 or 3 possible paths to the next level. Some of these lead to rewards like Tears of Essence, Embers of Dreams, or Schematics, all of which are meta progression and crafting resources. But some of them are marked as Fire Essence or Poison Essence paths that take you to areas where you get to choose 1 or 3 rewards of the corresponding essence once you've killed every enemy. There is also a small chance that a path to a special non-combat area will open. Some of these areas are the Soul Forge, Nia's Blessing, and Death's Offers. Each of these areas gives you the choice to improve your character in a different way. The Soul Forge, for example, allows you to upgrade one of 2 of your active skills, and if you only have 1 active skill, you can either upgrade it or change it for an equivalent skill. Death's Offers lets you choose one of 3 incredibly powerful boosts, each of which comes with an equally incredible trade-off. And Nia's Blessing lets you choose one of 3 very powerful boons that will persist throughout the run. There's also a store with an absolutely hilarious shopkeeper that has a limited assortment of goods. Some of them are meta progression rewards, some are upgrades that persist throughout the entire run, and there are also crafting recipes, instant heals, and other things. In some levels, there's also a portal to the Graveyard, which is a standalone multi-level area with especially difficult enemies, its own final boss, and specially powerful rewards. This is a non-mandatory area, but much as it happens with non-mandatory areas and elite fights in many games that follow the roguelike or roguelite model, your chances of winning the run increase substantially if you take the risk of going to these places and overcome them successfully. So as you can see, as far as the gameplay cycle goes, it's nothing out of the ordinary, but it does have many of the options and variants that you would expect from a roguelite, plus a couple more that you don't always see in games that follow this model. The upgrades that you get at the end of every level have been designed with the character's build in mind. I like that you usually get a combination of passive and active skills to choose from, and I also like that if none of the options are useful to you, you can always opt out in favor of a random permanent stat increase. One thing that this game does better than most other games is bullet mods, because in Soulslinger Envoy of Death, bullet mods synergize tremendously well with the rest of the perks, and they can be a force to be reckoned with. Though it'll probably take you a few runs to realize just how deep synergies that have to do with ammo mods are in this game. Active skills are also pretty cool. You have Ghost Pistoliers, for example, that do damage and draw attention away from you and do AoE damage when they die. You have a Golem that charges enemies and can be used to draw attention away from you, allowing you to close in and wreak havoc with your twin-barrel pistol. You have an AoE shock attack that stuns enemies in a cone in front of you that can be upgraded at the Soul Forge so that it stuns enemies all around you, and a lot of other stuff. The most interesting thing about these skills is that they can also be combined with other skills and upgrades for maximum efficiency. The shock skill that we just talked about, for example, can be combined with perks that increase the damage you do on stunned enemies. There aren't too many of these skills, however, and many are just variants of the same skill. For example, these pistoliers I tell you about have like 2 or 3 versions depending on the essence, but they are fun to use and they do feel like they add to your build, which is exactly what you want from these skills. Games like these also need a respectable array of bad guys, and you may not be able to tell after the first few runs, but after you have played the game for a while, you'll see that Soulslinger Envoy of Death has a decent variety of enemies. Some shoot you from a distance, some try to use melee attacks, some summon other enemies, some use massive AoE attacks, some teleport to your location, some explode when they are near, some cast shields on other enemies, some fly and rain bolts down on you. If you look at the enemies that you encounter over the course of a run in which you reach the final boss, you'll see that the enemy variety is actually pretty good. It has to be said though, 90% of the time in Soulslinger, all you do is run away from enemies and shoot them whenever you can. When you reach Act 2, things open up a little, and you have to dust off some of your good old FPS tactics, and the enemies in Act 3 take a little bit to figure out. But I got more of a tactical challenge from the demo version of Beyond Sunset than from this entire game. I had to duck and cover, kite enemies, lure enemies to choke points, change weapons to undo the enemy's advantage, etc. And I didn't do most of these things in Soulslinger. Do consider though that this game is more about your character's build than about combat tactics. Also, I'm getting the impression that Head Up as a developer leans a little bit too heavily into the monster closet experience. It's like they don't know how to challenge you with anything other than endless hordes of enemies. This is true of both Soulslinger and Bloodshed. Meta progression is nothing out of the ordinary. You have 2 or 3 places at your stronghold that offer different types of progression. There is the power totem, where you buy perks that make you straight out more resilient or deal more damage or collect resources faster. Pretty standard and boring if you ask me. And then you have the Well of Tears that works like a talent tree in which you can use some of the essence tiers that you've collected over the course of the runs to buy some perks. These are more interesting because they encourage you to play the game a little bit differently, which is always a good thing. There is the Bestiary, which you want to check out every time you get a little bit further, because every time you unlock a new enemy, it comes with a reward that you can claim. It's a clever little way to get you to open the thing regularly. It also features cool art and a decent description of each of the bad guys. Do read these descriptions. I would have never defeated the final boss if I hadn't. That's all I'm saying. And there is a workshop where you can craft new weapons, relics, and other items. And this is interesting because some of the most interesting blueprints are off the beaten trail. And yes, there is such a thing as off the beaten trail in this game, and we're gonna talk about that later. Soulslinger Envoy of Death currently has mixed reviews on Steam, and while I think this average does not represent the quality of the game, I think it should have at least mostly positive reviews, the devs kind of brought this situation upon themselves, because you really need to spend time with this game to discover the good stuff, and that is a problem. Allow me to elaborate. The game has a demo version available for you to play on Steam, but if you are the kind of person who plays a demo and thinks, Done. I already know everything I need to know about this game. I can promise you that in this case, you are wrong. And if you say, I don't want to play a game for 10 hours before it gets good, if the demo doesn't grab me, then it's a pass. I feel ya, bro. I'm a bit the same myself. But this game is a bit of an exception, and you don't have to play for 10 hours before you get to the meat. Just like 6 hours, give or take. And those 6 hours aren't even bad. When I showed this game over on CBS, I myself was only moderately invested in the game's overall premise. It looked good, it sounded good, and combat was weighty enough. It seemed to lean a little bit too heavily into its meta progression features, and I felt like it was lacking variety in every respect. There were only a handful of tile sets, every weapon fell into one of 2 weapon categories, and there just weren't enough enemy types. And to top things off, the game had some serious performance issues. And if I were a betting man, I'd bet that that's pretty much the impression you're going to get if you play only the demo version, minus the performance issues maybe. After playing the game's pre-release version for roughly 6 hours, I decided to tap out for good, mainly because of the game's optimization issues. But then the devs released an update with this notification. Hey ya Soulslingers, sharpen your aim and brace for the best version of Soulslinger yet. You told us the game's optimization wasn't where it should be. Well, that was an understatement, and we listened. So I decided to give the game a second chance, just in case, and poof, just like that, I killed the boss at the end of Act 1 in my first attempt without getting any lag or any significant FPS drops, though it was and still is not perfect, and achievements started to pour. Achievements that had been in the game since the very beginning, I might add. And then I went to the Outskirts, which is the location in which Act 2 takes place, and there I encountered a healthy number of new enemies. I found myself running around in new scenarios, and I started discovering new events that I hadn't seen before. All of this in a single day. Then a new NPC appeared, revealing new bits of story and lore, and this in turn made the NPCs at the safe haven reveal even more bits of story. And you know how it is with these roguelites. As you get better and as you unlock new OP meta progression upgrades, the first acts of the game become progressively easier and easier until they are just
barely an inconvenience.
But just as this was about to happen in Soulslinger, the game added a new variant to the mix. Random elite enemy encounters to make your life miserable, in a good way. I also took the time to read the description under some of the crafting recipes that I still hadn't unlocked. They vaguely suggested that I had to explore the game's areas a little bit more thoroughly. Explore? Oh, holy shit, there are secret areas with special loot to be discovered. I wasn't expecting this. And just when I thought I had looked under every nook and cranny in each of the game's locations, I got the message that a new secret portal had been opened. Secret portal? Oh, turns out there were even more secret areas. And I know these areas weren't added just through meta progression. They had always been there because some of them I had discovered before. I just couldn't figure out what they were for. Some of them were even moderately hard to find. And these secret portals take you to cool places in which you need to approach combat in a different, more creative way. There's even a little bit of platforming, and I like that in these levels the challenge is more about figuring out where to go than about timing jumps and dashes. It's good stuff, actually. Also, during the first few runs, I thought there were only 2 types of weapons, broadly speaking. There were revolvers and shotgun-like weapons. They weren't exactly shotguns, but they effectively worked as such. But then I unlocked the Triad, which effectively worked like a machine gun of sorts, and the Wraith Shot, which gave a whole new meaning to the ammo upgrades that you get in the game. Soulslinger is the definition of a late bloomer. Right off the bat, you'll probably understand that there is a build aspect to this game, and you'll probably say,
Oh, I get it.
But you don't. You'll come to realize how much deeper the build aspect of the game is much later in the game. You'll see that the weapon variety is greater than you originally thought much later in the game, and you'll come to realize that there is a good enough variety of locations and enemy types much later in the game.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have patience for a much later in the game, hence the mixed reviews, I suspect. Also, chances are that after you have discovered all the things the game has to offer, you will still need a few more runs to reach the final boss consistently, to figure out how to kill him, and to effectively pull it off. And the runs in this game are long, like really long. And I think that's what ultimately killed Soulslinger. At least, that's what made me throw this game back into this list and ditch the idea of making a standalone recommendation video. As for the story and lore aspects of the game, Soulslinger takes the story very seriously, so all the fancy locations, realistic character models, and professional voice acting serve to elevate the narrative aspect of the game. The game takes place in an Old West-inspired version of Limbo, and everyone is wearing cool attires to match. Though it seems a little bit random and even forced that they decided to go for a Western vibe. It feels like the art director had an idea of what he wanted the game to look like, and the writers had an idea of what they wanted the story to be about, but they never talked to each other until they each had finished their work. So the whole thing
Is weird.
not terrible by any means, but weird. I do like that the game makes good use of the roguelite model to tell its story. There's a mystery aspect that you need to piece together, and with every milestone conquered, a new piece of the story gets revealed. The game opens up with a very powerful cinematic cutscene that lets you in on the main character's predicament, on some of his most relevant personality traits, and his motivation to see his mission through to the end, even if you don't rightly know what the mission is. And that's a good thing, because it also sets the stage for an interesting mystery, and it does so with respect of the audience's intelligence. The game doesn't think you're stupid, so it doesn't go into lengthy exposition dumps about every tiny fucking detail. It tells you enough for you to know that you lost everything, your life included, but you have been given a second chance by Death himself to reclaim some of these. And all you need to do is kill some unequivocally bad guys who are altering the flow of things in the afterlife. But there are still a few questions that need answers, like, what the fuck is going on here? How did the main character get here? Where are we? What kind of deal did the main character strike with Death? Why is Death fighting against this cartel? Why is it so important that they defeat them? And who is this Lady Valerie character? And more importantly, do I get to fuck her? The protagonist is some dude who died and lost his girlfriend and is given the rare chance to bargain with Death himself to be reunited with her. But of course, he comes across some shocking revelations over the course of the game and things change for him. And all of that gets revealed over the course of multiple runs, you know, to keep the mystery alive. The story is not perfect, though, not by a long shot. Some characters know more about your situation than you do, and they say they don't tell you all they know because you are not ready. But when they finally spill their beans, you're still left wondering why they didn't tell you these things in the first place. They could have just as well said, listen, I can't tell you more because we need to leave some story bits for when you kill the bosses. Also, Lady Valerie felt a little bit like Discount Audrey from Darkest Dungeon 2. You know, the dangerous, mysterious gal who finds herself in a purgatory of sorts because she needs to atone for or undo some nasty shit she did in the past. But Audrey's story is straightforward, poignant, and effective. The game doesn't care about making her relatable or deserving of your sympathies. She's living in a hell of her own making, just like your character in that game, and she tags along for the ride in the hopes that she'll earn her ticket out of this hell. Lady Valerie is also a mysterious, dangerous woman who did something terrible in the past. In this case, she has struck a deal with Death for a chance to right her wrongs. But the problem is that the game wants to present her as someone who did a monstrous thing, but it also wants to depict her as a fundamentally good person that you're supposed to sympathize with. Someone who was in part a victim of circumstance and in part tremendously unlucky. And the story that they spin to make all of this work is convoluted and forced. And it really didn't need to be. Also, an NPC uses you to advance his own agenda, but he doesn't tell you all the details. But because the game didn't want to depict this NPC as evil, when the truth about his motivations gets revealed, when you learn about how he used you, said revelations lack gravitas, because his goals weren't bad to begin with. And I know this NPC I'm talking about is not supposed to be evil, but then why wasn't he more forthcoming about his motivations? Because plot? Your character goes through a moderately interesting story arc, though you can't help but think that he's not the sharpest tool in the shed if he doesn't see the problem with what he's asking from Death from the get-go. The villain is moderately interesting as well. He has a bone to pick with Death, and it's easy to see why, and his plan to pull it off sort of makes sense. There is, however, one hideous cliche present in the story, and it's the typical situation in which you meet the bad guy and he talks your ear off about the things you need to know about what's going on. But when you ask him more questions, he says he doesn't have time to explain. Writers everywhere.
You need to stop that.
Also, we didn't really need a background story for this character, and all it did was paint him as someone childish and dumb with his whole deal about the promise that his father made him or whatnot. We also get one of the worst versions of the trope of names hold power that we often see in stories about demons. Bottom line is, he's not the best villain I've ever seen, but he's also nowhere near the worst. The way in which the story is intertwined with the gameplay is not as complex as it is in Hades or Tainted Grail Conquest. You don't meet a whole cast of characters while you are out there doing your things, and the stories of the ones that you do meet don't mix and mesh like the ones in these other games. But there is still a very story-driven incentive for you to go out there and kill everything that moves, and that's good enough for me. In fact, the devs went all in with the story aspect of the game and bothered to make the characters and the setting come to life with high-quality production values, which you almost never find below the AA threshold, and that's quite impressive. Soulslinger Envoy of Death is not a masterpiece or a solid ye old gamer recommendation. It would have been if it hadn't dosified the good stuff so much, and if the story had been kept more grounded and to the point. You need to play way too many hours to experience all of the good stuff. There is an interesting build aspect to the game that in the long run becomes complex, and a discovery aspect to it that feels rewarding and fun. But there are just too many games out there that offer a comparable experience and fire on all cylinders from the get-go. I think that for the price, it is a more than decent game though. If you are looking for a roguelite FPS in which the story matters, that is first and foremost about your character's build, then Soulslinger Envoy of Death might just be the game for you. Astro Prospector. Astro Prospector is a game that I can only describe as asteroids on asteroids. This is a game that I would have never picked if I hadn't been given a review code. I was also this close to uninstalling it after 15 minutes because it took me a while to come to terms and even understand some of the game's design choices. But you know what? After 15 minutes or so I said,
Oh, I get it.
and I ended up playing the damn thing all the way through to the end and wishing it were longer. Actually, Astro Prospector quickly became my go-to game for several situations. Man, I don't know what to play. Let's play Astro Prospector. I am a little tired and Icewind Dale 2 is just too demanding. But I still want to play something. Let's play Astro Prospector. I have 30 minutes to spare, what should I do? Let's play Astro Prospector. I want to listen to this true crime story, but I don't necessarily want to watch the video because that would be boring. Let's play Astro Prospector meanwhile. So the core gameplay is as follows. You control a little spaceship that flies around in the Coffeeverse. Just go with it, okay? So yeah, you fly around destroying coffee-roids and evil spaceships that are out there to kill you for some reason, and if you survive long enough, you get to fight the final big bad boss. And you have a limited time to do all these things. Over the course of the game, you face progressively meaner spaceship and bosses and harder and more complex level hazards. But you also unlock new ways to kill your enemies and overcome your obstacles more efficiently. The game has sectors, each sector has levels, and each level has a boss. When you defeat the boss, you earn the right to move on to the next level, but you can't go back to any level at any given time if you wish to. Whether or not you beat a level, you always collect in-game currency like seeds and scrap with which you can buy new perks for your ship, because there is a meta progression aspect to the game. More importantly, if you don't beat the level, when you lose, you don't go back to square one. The game never forces you to do levels that you have already overcome. And I know that some of you are going to be overjoyed with this. I like that every level is different and that the pace at which the game introduces new enemies, obstacles, and mechanics is just right. It's not slow enough for you to get bored with the gameplay, nor too fast for you to get overwhelmed with new things. The extra weapons and perks that become available to you via the game's meta progression are also fun and useful. There are also a lot of passive bonuses that you might expect, but also new weapons and features that you must activate and use at your discretion during battles. And I think the balance between these two types of upgrades is also just right. The very best thing about the game are the boss battles though. This is where the game truly shines in my opinion, especially the final level and the final boss battle. They are creative, fun, and challenging. The whole premise of the game is weirdly interesting as well. It opens with a cute, clever, and creative comic book-like scene in which they manage to tell you a story without resorting to any dialogue or narration. And in the end there is a closing scene that makes everything make sense in a way that is equally clever and creative. The art direction is solid, cohesive, and weirdly chillaxy with its coffeehouse aesthetics and its jazz tunes that sound like something straight out of Chet Baker's late night jazz. All of which makes sharp contrast with the relentless busy hell that is the gameplay. But it's very much by design, and that's where the beauty of it all lies. I do hate that the music track that you get in this screen just ends abruptly and starts over. You guys, you need to fix this ASAP. There is another issue, a big one that I have with this game. And usually when a game has this problem, and I do see it as a problem, it's an absolute deal breaker for me to the point that I uninstall the game and never touch it again. The problem is that this game has hard meta progression checks, and it feels like you're getting further each time, more because you unlock new perks, and not because you are getting better at the game. This makes the game feel mobile-y at times, and it waters down the feeling of accomplishment quite significantly. Hades and Darkest Dungeon 2, for example, have meta progression, and it is quite powerful. But in these games, you still get further every time because you make better decisions and get good at its mechanics, and not because you unlocked some perk that carries you over the finish line all by itself. But there were times in Astro Prospector in which I simply knew that I was not going to overcome a level until I unlocked a few additional perks, so I just kept doing the level over and over without any hope of success, only to farm resources so that I could unlock the perk that would do the trick. Also, the game doesn't really expect you to think of a build and commit to it by focusing on one of its multiple skill branches. I felt like you were simply expected to unlock whatever you could afford at the time, and I think this was a huge wasted opportunity. It would have been much better if the game had encouraged you to go for a turret build, or a missile build, or a survival build, rather than go for everything everywhere all at once. That's the only thing that makes me a little bit surprised about the game's overwhelmingly positive score on Steam. I mean, the game is fun to play, but overwhelmingly positive? But I guess since I never expected Astro Prospector to be anything more than a fun time waster, I didn't care about patting myself on the back at the end of the game and say, "Yay, you did it, you bested the game," as was the case with Hades or Darkest Dungeon 2, for example. And as a consequence, this huge problem of meta progression checks and lack of relevant builds didn't bother me too much in this game. Astro Prospector currently goes for $3 in my region, and I've spent 14.5 hours on it. And for a game as fun as this, with this level of polish, I'd say it's well worth the investment. Forever Skies. Forever Skies is a first-person open-world survival game that follows in the footsteps of games like Subnautica. Take this review with a grain of salt though, or better yet, with a whole salt shaker, because this is not a genre that I am terribly familiar with. I do know that Forever Skies is lacking Subnautica's level of polish and complexity, but it featured enough unique mechanics and concepts for it to be a worthwhile investment of my time and money. You start the game in a massive space station called Ark, which has been labeled the last bastion of humanity. The game wastes no time letting you know that you and everyone on the ship is infected with a lethal blood virus, and that the only hope for everyone lies in finding a cure in the planet below. And of course, you're the one who's been tasked with said mission. but apparently you're not the first they've sent to explore the planet. The expedition team that went down before you went radio silent, and it's up to you to figure out what happened to them. But as soon as you enter the planet's orbit, your communication with Ark is also lost. And so the table is served. You have to find a cure to the virus that's killing everyone, figure out what happened to the expedition team that was sent to investigate, find a way to re-establish communication with Ark and get back up there, and not die in the process. And I found the whole premise refreshingly straightforward and convincing. I was invested in the story and the main mission the whole way through. And I think the game made a pretty good job of providing motivation for me to engage with its multiple mechanics, like finding a way to travel between locations, improving my Zeppelin, which was both my stronghold and my main means of transportation, and making sure I didn't kill myself with some stupid ass decision. My first story-related objective was to find Noah, and the journals and other breadcrumbs that I found scattered throughout the game's various locations were written well enough that I cared about this objective. The game was really good at selling me the idea that finding Noah would provide answers to all the questions that had been raised over the course of the game, up until that point at least. I also like that there is quite a bit of emergent gameplay for you to lose yourself in. At some point I hadn't upgraded my ship enough to be able to access the landing platform at a certain location. I didn't have enough vertical thrust. But I wasn't about to go back from where I had come, so I built a storage container, I dropped it in the middle of the railway outside my Zeppelin, and used it as a staircase of sorts to jump to the platform that I wanted to access. And I just love when a game doesn't funnel you into doing things the one way that you're supposed to. There are a few scripted things in this game, and set paths that you have to follow, but also a lot of freedom. The game also does a good job of adding new variables to the gameplay mix to keep things interesting. When you feel like exploration and resource farming are getting old, then puzzle solving becomes a thing, and then complex crafting, or combat. There are, however, a few things that I do not like about Forever Skies. I can see many Subnautica fans not being impressed with this one in the slightest. After a while, you'll likely come to realize that the only unique locations in the game are those that are part of the story's critical path. The rest of the locations can come off as repetitive and therefore unremarkable after a few hours of playing the game. Also, there are many buildings and places that look super cool, but they are just props. You really can't land on them or interact with them in any way. If the story, the setting, and the stakes don't manage to get you invested, I can see why you would just end up not caring about the exploration or the puzzles. I did, however, and I did feel the pressure to complete the game's objectives, but I am sure that's not going to be the case with everyone. I think the difficulty could have also used a few more fine-grained options for the player to customize his or her experience. It would have been awesome if you had the option of making insect swarms do damage over time, for example, so that you'd be forced to wait out the threat inside your ship. Sleeping with your ship's doors open or closed does not make much of a difference. It would have been cool if there had been circumstances that had forced you to close your doors while you rested. It would have also been cool if there had been conditions that forced you to spend the night floating about in the middle of nowhere. Every once in a while, your Zeppelin gets attacked by flying creatures, but sorting out this threat is super easy, since there is no way for you to fail. You only need to step out of your ship, shoot whatever is attacking you 2 or 3 times to force it to detach from your ship, and then go back to whatever you were doing. These creatures do not retaliate, they don't attack you, they are just annoying. And there should have been a way for you to customize the difficulty so that these things would actually be a threat of some sort. All in all, I would say it's mostly positive and worth the $15 that it currently goes for on Steam. But if this game interests you, I strongly recommend that you check out some other reviews or footage, because this title belongs in a genre that I am not awfully familiar with. I just know what I like, I guess. Bloodshed. Bloodshed and Soulslinger are both first-person shooters. Both were developed by Head Up and both of them were released in 2025. Actually 1 month apart or so. Bloodshed has way better reviews than Soulslinger on Steam, but not on this channel, and let's see why. Aesthetically, Bloodshed is a throwback to those first-person shooters from the John Romero days, namely the OG Doom. The core gameplay loop is as simple as it gets. Kill monsters in a circuit-like location, level up, and survive for a certain amount of time. It features roguelite meta progression and leveling mechanics, and killing elite enemies triggers a pachinko machine-like minigame that gets you additional rewards. Bloodshed is structured in episodes, and each episode has mandatory and non-mandatory missions. You need to beat a mission to be able to progress to the next one, but you can go back and play any mission at any given time. The rewards you get to choose from every time you level include weapons, upgrades to weapons that you already have, spells that trigger automatically over a certain period of time, and straightforward increments to your maximum life, your luck, and other things. At some point in the game, you'll likely unlock workbenches as well. These workbenches appear throughout the level, and they can be used to mod your character's specific weapons if they have reached a high enough level. And this is one of the best things about the game, because it slightly changes the way in which your weapons work, and that in turn may encourage you to play the game slightly differently. There are secondary objectives to be completed during these missions, like upgrading X weapon Y times, killing X number of enemies, or reaching X level with Y character. You can complete these objectives regardless of whether or not you complete the mission successfully. Completing these secondary objectives will unlock new weapons, spells, and characters for you. The new spells and weapons you unlock will become available as possible rewards for the next runs. Be mindful though, if you have too many weapons and spells in your Rolodex of possible rewards, you might end up watering down whatever build you're going for. Luckily, over the course of these runs you also get coins with which you can purchase permanent upgrades. And one of those permanent upgrades is the choice of excluding some rewards from the Rolodex so that they never appear again during the mission, which allows you to focus on those weapons and spells that you really like. You also unlock several characters over the course of the game. All of these characters are voiced, and each of them has its own array of cheesy one-liners. Jared has some of the most badass comments in the game, and they sometimes brought a smile to my face. If you understand that Sakura is a complete Sumer meme, you'll likely have a chuckle or two with some of the idiotic things she says. But it's Father Fidelis who absolutely steals the show, with one-liners like, "Get a job," "Get a haircut," or "You kids think you know everything, I'm gonna teach you." But my favorite is when he gets hit and says, "I'm old, I'm confused." He is absolutely hilarious, and his little lines never get old. No pun intended. Unfortunately, these characters are almost exactly the same gameplay-wise, which means that you play all of them almost in the exact same way. They have different stats, weapons, and special skills, but it really makes no difference because you're likely going to use the same tactics for all the characters. The game does not encourage you to use them differently, and it does not punish you for using the same tactics with all of them. Father Fidelis is a bit of an exception, and if you upgrade his primary weapon to the fullest and buy all of the mods, you'll probably start using different tactics to kill your enemies. In fact, I hadn't realized how mind-numbingly same-ish these characters were until I upgraded and modded Father Fidelis' weapons fully and started to see value in playing the game a little bit differently. I haven't unlocked the last character yet because it takes an insane amount of farming, but so far Malachias and Father Fidelis are the only characters who use melee attacks. Father Fidelis in particular has no character-specific ranged attack, so if you don't get a different weapon or a ranged spell before the final confrontation, you simply won't be able to beat the final boss because the targets are simply out of melee range. And I don't think this is a good design. There are many spells that you can unlock and use in Bloodshed, more so than in Soulslinger, I think. But just as it happens with the various characters that you can unlock, it's all a bit of a game of smoke and mirrors, because none of these spells make a huge difference in your game plan. The Scythe, the Throwing Axe, and the Vengeful Spirit look different, and they have slightly different mechanics and ranges, but they all do the same thing at the end of the day. Bear traps hold enemies, and demon traps work nicely in choke points and corners. But since they trigger automatically, you cannot use them consistently in a tactical way. The only spell that made a difference for me was the Ring of Blessing, which summons a ring that heals your character over time, and I found myself planning my run around this skill. Soulslinger probably has fewer skills, but you use them at your discretion, and they are way more varied in terms of what they can be used for during a battle. You can't summon creatures to draw attention away from you, you have tactical nukes, skills that shock enemies in place, etc. And the same thing goes for character-specific weapons. They are slightly different, but they are not more or less efficient against this or that type of enemy, or for this or that type of situation or location. Also, one thing that got really old really fast for me is the fact that every mandatory mission is about surviving a certain amount of time, and sometimes we're talking about 30 minutes. Each level has a different layout and new enemy types get introduced every time, but the objective remains the same, and that can get really boring after a while. It's a bit too shallow, and because of that it fails to keep you interested after a few hours. Non-mandatory missions is where this game truly shines though. First, you must unlock them by collecting 3 special coins that you can only get from elusive spiders that are hidden away in some of the most inconspicuous areas of a level. This makes exploration matter at least a bit, and it adds a little extra challenge, because you'll have to keep an eye out for these while you are trying to survive relentless swarms of enemies. Second, unlike the game's regular missions, non-mandatory missions have stages that go from killing X number of enemies, to accessing a certain location, to killing the big bad boss that spawns in the end. Some secondary objectives also add much needed variety to some of the missions. One of them is to kill all the gargoyles in this area, which is probably the biggest and most interesting area in the game. And finding all the gargoyles while fending off waves upon waves of enemies can prove to be quite challenging. Speaking of waves upon waves of enemies, there are plenty of enemies in Bloodshed, more so than in Soulslinger I would say. But as it happens with spells and characters, enemy variety is also a bit deceitful. Most of the bad guys are just reskins of other bad guys. Enemy attacks are limited to ranged projectiles of varying speed, melee attacks, multiple shot attacks, and undeath AoE effects. There is this guy who summons AoE pits, and there are also hives which spawn spiders, but that's it. I didn't feel like any of the enemies required me to think about how to kill them. After you kill the final boss, you also get the choice to create and customize your own missions, but this essentially boils down to choosing a location, a difficulty level, and a survival time. So nothing spectacular going on with that either. Like Soulslinger, Bloodshed also launched with horrible performance issues, but thankfully they've all been taken care of by now. I've spent 20 hours with Bloodshed and unlocked 72% of the achievements, but many of those hours were spent out of pure completionism, to complete this or that secondary objective and to unlock this or that achievement, not because I couldn't put the game down. Bloodshed has many of the features and mechanics that you'd expect from a roguelite FPS. The gameplay, the meta progression, and the variety are all there, but all of these things are just way too shallow, and that means that the game is going to wear out its welcome rather quickly and start running on completionist fumes after 10 hours or so. And when you finally put it down for good, chances are you won't be feeling like you're retiring a great game. And that's it for now. Those are the games that I have been playing lately. Stay tuned for that Icewind Dale 2 Enhanced Edition review, for the video on the 5 RPGs that came out in 2025 that didn't do it for me, and for the video on the 5 RPGs that are doing it for me in 2025. And as always, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.